Thanks very much. Tonight was a wine night. You all have enough wine? We'll see, I guess. Okay. This has been a really wonderful conference, and for me, one of the most wonderful things is the opportunity to work with Claudia Emerson and to get to know her and Kent better. And one of the things that I've learned about them is that we have in common that the three of us shared a turtle, well, separately, a turtle rescue operation. Claudia has written about her turtle rescue operation with Kent, and I've written about mine, so I'm going to dedicate the reading of this poem to Kent and Claudia, and it's called To a Snapping Turtle Lately Hatched. I saved a baby snapping turtle in Prospect Park and picked it up off the road and carried it back to the pond it was escaping from, put it in, and then I looked over and I noticed there was a line of Canada geese on the other side of the pond, and some of them were standing on two legs and others were standing on one leg, not out of acrobatic exhibitionism, but because the snapping turtles in the pond had taken away the other leg. So that went into the poem. And there's also a kind of allusion to a story that William James told about a young cosmologist who was giving a lecture on the origins of the universe. And an elderly woman came up to him afterwards and said, "Well, that's very nice, young man, but in my cosmology, the world is balanced on the back of a giant turtle." And he said, "Ah, well, what's that turtle balanced on top of?" And the old woman said, "Ah, you think you got me there, but it's turtles all the way down." So this is to a snapping turtle lately hatched. By interrupting your mild gallop and lifting you, a meager dollop of flesh resembling a scallop encrusted with dirt, I no doubt saved you from a wallop that would have hurt. Eyeball to eyeball now, you blink, and faster than thought, you cannot think, reflexively begin to shrink down to a center, guarded by armor without a chink that naught may enter. But one cannot go into zero. With too much flesh to disappear, you have no choice but play the hero, which you do with grace, head jutting out, then limbs, an aeronaut treading space. So profoundly self-sufficient, you do not even seem to want a turtle or an elephant to stand upon. No cosmological event holds your attention. You are perfection of a kind, but cannot know, you would not mind, how utterly you're left behind. Taking your side, I put you down before the pond where you'll reside. Your destiny to lie in mud and our far more toxic crud, with your jaws parted to the flood, wiggling your tongue until some darter nips its bud and the trap is sprung. Or venturing among the shallows for waterfowl and water willows, gulping a drumstick into swallows, so great your greed. You will not boast among your fellows of my good deed, but someday on the shore I'll watch a line of geese, now out of reach, sing your powers of retention, each with one leg missing. And what they've learned from you, they'll teach, volubly hissing. This is actually another poem about a tortoise. I only have two, so. The ancient Greeks were very fond of making up stories about their poets. And about the tragic playwright Aeschylus was that he was killed when he went out of his house and an eagle was carrying a tortoise off for dinner and dropped it, and it landed on his head and killed him. I wasn't going to write about that, but one night I was watching Jeopardy, and the response in question was, "This ancient author is said to have died when an eagle dropped a tortoise on his head." Who was John Milton? That question, wildly ricocheting, travels throughout the Empyrean's upper levels before it knocks a tortoise off the shelf where it had once paused to collect itself. It now commences free fall. Has it found the head that it will rhyme with on the ground? Not yet, not yet. Contestant number 2, a young mother of 4 from Kalamazoo, draws hope and sustenance, and from thin air a link between the tortoise and a hare that does not hold. Who was Aesop? No. We're left hanging for a moment or so. Contestant number 3 is out to lunch and will not try his luck or play a hunch, while answer seeks the question still to come, and tortoise drops toward an unwitting dome, fringed with white hair, an inexpressive mask, weathered by questions we no longer ask, a name our 3 contestants fail to guess. Who was the tragic poet Aeschylus? This is a villanelle. It's called On the Interpretation of Dreams. As you may have guessed, I like to steal titles from other people. My wife her dreams are more interesting than mine, and I've sometimes borrowed hers for poems, and this led me to think about the relationship between dream and interpretation. The dream desires to be understood, just as a painting wants an eye responsive to its vision of the beautiful and good. Then let the dreamer start from sleep to brood on why it so resists intelligence if the dream desires to be understood as thoroughly as, say, a poem would. For the dreamer musing, now awake and pensive on his vision of the beautiful and good, knows it is meaningless until construed. But how may he learn the significance of the dream? Desires to be understood take shape in it. Those fantasies that flood over our sleep, so fleeting, so intensive in their visions of the beautiful and good, become the figures of our speech. Renewed dream images appear to be made sense of, and dream desires to be understood in our vision of the beautiful and good. And this is another poem from the same impulse of interpretation. It's called To the Blackboard. And I thought, after I wrote it, I thought, there will be a time a few years hence when I will be reading this and I will have to explain to people what a blackboard was. But strangely enough, blackboards are still here. They haven't left in the way of, phonograph records and things like that. So I think everybody does still know what a blackboard is. It contains a few words and phrases, usually confined to the Saturday version of the New York Times crossword puzzle. There's tabula rasa, which means blank slate. A palimpsest is simply a surface that's been written on over and over again. And orts are tiny little pieces. So to the blackboard. Unyielding surface of preconscious mind and childhood presence, present ever since. Your monolithic slab still represents whatever I can never get behind. Unyielding, yes, but never unforgiving. Go back a bit. For 30 years and more, I've found you waiting for me by the door of all the rooms in which I've earned my living. A tabula rasa whose right-angled frame urges inclusion while defying sprawl, and always as a form fixed on a wall. So in my childhood you were just the same, the presence I could always count upon. And though my sums were often incorrect, my words misspelled, you never did object to being jabbed at with a piece of bone. Nor did we notice your indifference to whether we remembered or forgot the third person singular, amat, of the verb amare in the present tense indicative. Amare meant to love in the real world that floated by outside, its endless possibilities denied by your mere presence. What were you thinking of? Swans mirrored on their pond, foals beside mare, the lovers who have gone inside undressing, light upon darkness, darkness repossessing the red leaves spinning dryly through the air. All this a film that passed you by completely, leaving no mark, unlike the ones we traced so carefully they'd never be erased, scratching our little hearts out on you neatly, as though the weightlessness of our thought could outlast time. Not so. Those marks of ours were brushed off lightly, unremarked, in showers of dust as the erasers clapped and coughed, surrounding you in clouds of gilded haze. For if, as then and now, it seemed and seems you figured rather largely in our dreams, we were no part of yours back then. These days, if sense emerges out of sign on sign at random when responsibility for what goes on and off you falls on me, I've sense enough to credit it as mine. For you write nothing and were never heard, apart from that nerve-devastating shriek you make when chalk is dragged across your cheek to utter phoneme, syllable, or word. What's to be done, then, is all mine to do, and likewise mine the reward, the glory, since after all it's me telling your story and not you telling mine. I'm happy to. I really am, and happy in my role as residential existentialist to stand before your thought-stained palimpsest and swipe occasionally at your soul. But you'll live on in rooms I'll leave forever, confronting with your reservoir of patience the rise of provosts and the fall of nations, equally present to the dull, the clever, the hopeful, the hapless, and the bored. Yet even for you, deaf oracle and dumb, milky-eyed seer, a time will surely come when you will have passed on to your reward. Tell us before you leave, before the earth possesses you again in shards and orts, whether you know an answer that supports this weathering of mine for what it's worth, whether beyond us there is aught to wonder at what the meaningful was meant to mean, at what can happen to us here between the momentary lightning and the thunder. I mentioned the other day of writing a dramatic monologue. In the voice of Lot's wife. And you will remember that Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back as God was destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. A pillar of salt, it turns out, is not this great big thing, but it's about the size of an urn, and it's made out of dried salt. It was a way that salt was carried to the Middle East. So here's Lot's wife looks back. I want it told correctly from the first. I was responsible. I had been warned. And yet, in spite of knowing what I durst not do, from sheer perversity I turned though not to see what there was left to see, which by that time was a mere pile of rubble that held no further interest for me, but just to make unprecedented trouble. Not all that difficult back then, lest guile and double-dealing fall into neglect and disobedience, go out of style. I did it then for me, in retrospect, and not from any inadvertency or out of misplaced sympathy for them. Those cities of the plain were much too fancy for his omnipotence not to condemn. When tourists ask me why I turned, I say I had no choice since I was picked by Lot. That lost its humor when Lot passed away. My turning back did complicate the plot, though it was certainly not my intention that everything I thought or felt or knew should be salt-cured by divine intervention. I was allowed my little joke or two, but silenced otherwise. Not one more word. Ages rolled by without another word from the nameless wife of Lot, until the Lord fell silent too. These days he's unheard from, though not unheard of. The fame outlasts the act and lives on in the collective memory past usefulness. Now, someone with less tact might argue that the same is true of me, though as fates go, mine seems less disagreeable, providing that it doesn't last forever. I want it known that here, for the foreseeable future, I plan to stay exuding savor. Danny Larkin, Philip Larkin, sorry. Sometimes voices, poems will get into your head and it'll be hard to get rid of them. A few years ago, I read a poem by, well, more than a few years ago, a poem of Philip Larkin's that begins, "They fuck you up, your mom and dad." And we all, it struck me that if I read it twice, I would probably have it memorized. And it's the kind of poem that one sort of agrees with, but feels at times the need to exercise. So after a while, I wrote just a smack at Larkin. You brushed your teeth, you washed your you brushed your teeth, you washed your face. They tucked you in, your mom and dad. They really weren't all that bad. They weren't always on your case. They were as good as parents got back then and did the best they knew with such a whining shit as you. Were they appreciated? Not. And you, who will not take a wife nor raise up kiddies of your own, can do no more than bitch and moan. Get over it, Phil. Get a life. Danny Anderson and I have, as Danny explained to me, the same problem, which is that people will come up to us and say, "Is your wife here? Is your wife here? Is she here now? Is she at the conference?" And he says, "No, she's away for," oh. And of course, the same thing happens to me. You know, I'm here, would you like to? Oh, so in the absence of my wife, and as a way of the closest I can do to conjuring up her presence, I'll read two poems that I wrote for her. They're called 2 and 3. They're called 2 is called Where We Are Now. Back in that time when we were very new to one another, I thought with delight in fresh discoveries by day and night, and lengthy absence to be gotten through before we came together to undo the work of deprivation at first sight once more of one another, I would write this poem out and send it off to you. But where the two of us are now, and whether we are there together, I could not have said. I was like someone gazing into the wrong end of a telescope, and whether passionate and playful phrasing might be a portent, he could only hope. And this is called the third three. Yet here we are. When one says taking pleasure, what both mean is actually something in between taking and giving. And in the give and take of making love, what is it that we make, if not the present tense of we have been? For us, to whom much absence is routine, and laced with hours that are dour and mean, often there is no pleasure, just an ache when one says, take. Yet here we are, and as the dream machine records for later viewing this new scene, we are the water and the thirst we slake, as all of our senses come awake, and both are touched and tasted, heard and seen, when one says, take. One of the projects that I've been involved with for some years now is a translation of an Italian sonneteer named Belli, G.G. Belli, Giuseppe Gioacchino Belli, who was a poet living and writing in Rome in the the first half of the 19th century. Belli wrote sonnets. He wrote 2,279 sonnets. Lock the doors. I'm going to read a few of them tonight. Belli wrote in a dialect called Romanesco, which is the language of the Roman people, the dialect of the Roman people. So for a long time, he was never in any of the anthologies of Italian poetry. About 15 years ago, I found some of them, and I began looking into his work and starting to translate it. Other people have done it before me, though. Belli was a kind of strange, radical kind of man. The poetry, he was against the authority of his day, which was religious authority. He was against the Pope because the Pope ruled the papal states at that time. And if you think of the Pope as a benevolent figure, the Pope in his day had a full-time executioner. So it was like he was an autocratic kind of figure. All of these poems are just in other voices. There is no real Belli voice. It's like he speaks in the voices of the Pope, prostitutes, pimps, anyone who begins with a P, I guess. He is sometimes philosophical, sometimes theological, sometimes scatological. I'll read, this is called The Life of Man. And you have to sort of put quotation marks around each of these. It's always a different speaker. 9 months in the stench, then in swaddling bound among the kisses, the milksops and the bawling, then strapped into a basket, hauled around with a stiff neck brace to keep the head from falling. Then there begin the torments of the school, the ABCs, the cold, the cane's hard knocks, measles, the potty seat, the squeezed out stool, a touch of scarlet fever, chickenpox. Then hunger comes, and weakness, and weariness, a trade, the rent, the jailhouse and the government, the hospitals, the debts, the getting laid, the scorching summer and the winter snow. Then blessed be God's name. When life is spent, comes death to finish it with hell below. This is another speaker giving us a little bit of theology here. It's called The Creation of the World. The year that Jesus baked the world, he found the dough was there already that he needed. He wanted to make it big and green and round, so with a melon for a model, he proceeded. He made one only sun, one moon, one globe, but he made a pile of stars from pasta stuff. Birds above, beasts in the middle, fish below. He planted the plants and then he said, enough. Man he created too, I forgot to say. And with the man, the lady, Eve and Adam, and some apple that he wouldn't let them taste. And he yelled by God as loud as he knew how, soon as he saw that they had disobeyed him, folks of the future, you are screwed up now. This is another poem about royalty. It's called The Sovereigns of the Old World. In Roman dialect, sovrano is soprano, the soprani of the old world. A king there was who once upon a time sent forth this edict to his huddled masses. I am I, and you are no more than slime, you lying scoundrels, so just shut your faces. I make straight the twisted, and I twist the straight. You are what I could sell off by the lot, and if I were to hang you all, so what? You rent your lives and stuff from me, the state. If you don't have a title to your name, if you're not pope or king or emperor, you haven't got the cards to play the game. And with this edict came a hangman who asked all, did they or did they not concur? And all as one replied, that's true, that's true. So in people like popes and all, he found vices and virtues in some of the common people. This is called the best of all trades. I started selling produce, too much scrimping. Next I became a bookseller, did worse. Resolved then on another change of course and gave myself up to the trade of pimping. In this field, I confess, as a Christian man, not only do I profit, but I pillage. A third of the members of the Sacred College line up to take the merchandise at hand. Abbots and monsignors are my clients, and husbands, widows, lonely spinsters who can count on satisfaction with reliance. For I'm honest, and my prices are the best, and all my men are titled and well-to-do, and all my women are beauties and well-dressed. This is a poem called Truth. And in the creative writing class, I guess you'd be told not to write a poem called Truth because it's a terrible abstraction. But it begins with a simile, the like of which I've never found anywhere else. Truth. The truth is like a bad case of the runs. The truth is like a bad case of the runs, daughter, that when it goes on the attack, you've barely got the time to scrunch your buns and do your little dance to hold it back. Just so the pure truth rises from your bowels, and if you haven't sewn your lips together, it spews its soup of consonants and vowels, were you as silent as a Trappist brother. Why lie or keep it hidden in the dark whenever the truth is what you deeply feel? No, when it chooses, truth flies to the mark. God wishes our mouths to bring forth trust, yet men treat theirs like envelopes they seal. No, the truth always, always as it must. And I'll conclude with a poem called The Confessor, which is a dialogue. It's a dialogue between a kind of simple young Roman woman and her priest in confession. Father, begin with the Confiteor. I did. Act of contrition? Yes. Commence. I called my husband Dick Brain. Is there more? I stole from him $1.50. What else? When Pussy broke a pot, I said I was so angry with her, go to hell, and she's God's creature. Any more to tell? There's this young fellow that I took to bed. What happened then? A bit of that and this, but always in the designated place and in the other. Oh, beastly sinfulness. And so, because of your young reprobate, come with repentant heart and downcast face. Tomorrow, daughter, my house about 8. Save those for the end, probably. I'm going to read, there are some poems by Bailey in this book called Signs and Wonders, and I hear that there are some of the rare unsigned copies in the bookstore. So, I'm going to read a poem called Souvenir. I'm part of the post-pastoral poetry generation myself. So most of these are urban poems. I'll read a short one called "The Flower Thief" first. It's set in Brooklyn. If you know Brooklyn, you may recognize the character, the flower thief. At last he struck on our block and snatched geraniums out of the flower pots and window boxes we had left unwatched. Plucked the plants whole, took flowers, stem, and roots, danced down the street in glee and merriment, every so often letting out a whoop, asperging us with soil mix as he went, until he settled on an empty stoop. And there gazed on his prizes, fascinated by something in them only he could see, while those who called the local precinct waited, watching him with or without sympathy. He learned the essence of geranium. We learned that the police don't always come. And this is called Souvenir. The souvenir in question, I think you would get it reading it, maybe not hearing it, but the souvenir was a cricket made out of corn husks, little tiny things in a plastic bag. Somehow it had escaped by the time that we had flown back to New York City and on to our new home. That slender insect shaped from a green husk of corn, twisted until crickety on a cobbled street in Rome. A Chinese emigrant, perched by a cardboard box, fastened these vegetal crickets and grasshoppers. His wiry fingers bent and tied the sheaths to flex in forms that would appeal to bargain-hunting shoppers. Bagged up in plastic, tied with little wire collars, like goldfish in their bowls waiting for adoption, each silent cricket vied for euros or for dollars and waited to be sold. It had no other option. If it had been poverty, the dull, incessant grind of want which went unheeded, that snatched up and replanted him here in Italy, what put it in his mind to sell what no one needed and almost no one wanted? Was it just ignorance of the foreign market? That and the optimist's more than half-filled glass? What every Roman wants is a good cornhusk cricket. With a few deft ties and twists, my dream will come to pass. No, that isn't funny. He sleeps on a low cot in a single crowded room on the shift assigned him. He owes his landlord money. He fears he's been forgotten by his family back home. Will good luck ever find him? Perhaps, que sera, sera. But now among the fakes, the faux Gucci scarves and shoes, the AA batteries and plastic ephemera, he stands by his box and makes a life he did not choose from what would otherwise be overlooked as waste, as he himself might be in this world's new order. But how shall the genuine not be wholly effaced from life and memory and taught to slip the border? How, if not by design? This is a short poem called Support. It's a sonnet. Support is what the film of oily dust is put upon and slowly bonded to until it forms a thin, ambivalent crust that disappears when there comes into view whatever we are here today to see. A vase of flowers, wolf dying at Quebec, a virgin with an infant on her knee, some women grinning at Toulouse-Lautrec. If it cannot be said to face the wall, there's nonetheless a wall or ledge or shelf supporting it, though the provisionality of that support says that support itself moves through such portals, all of which depend on one another and so never end. I've written a couple of poems about paintings, ekphrastic paintings, as we say. And this is one called John Coke at the New York Historical Society, The Party. John Coke, I have to explain a few things, was a very famous painter of the mid-20th century. He had covers on Time magazine and all, and he was really a pretty good painter. He lived in a large apartment on the Upper West Side, and his paintings were often of the apartment and the people that he knew, who tended to be artists and models and critics and so on. His wife, Dora, taught piano in the apartment, and one of my friends in the 70s was named Andre Kimbrell, and Andre studied with Dora. Andre left New York, and I heard he had become a lawyer. He gave up being a pianist and had a law degree. John Coke was almost forgotten for many years, and then at the New York Historical Society there was a show of his work, and I went, and there was this poem called The Party, or The Summer Party, and I looked into it, and it was full. It was a painting of John Coke's apartment full of his friends, and I looked over in the corner of the painting, looking out the window, was Andre. And there was a key to the figures, the people in the painting, and I looked down, and there it was, Andre. So I went home and Googled him and discovered that he had become an environmental lawyer in Maine and given up the piano, and that was that. And somehow all of it, thinking about the ambitions of young people and older artists like John Coke came together, and this is the poem. It has a really cumbersome title, John Coke at the New York Historical Society. That's where the show of his work was, The Party. Early evening, the summer party people meet in a large, airy, sparsely furnished room, sorting themselves into duets and trios for conversation. All except one who leans out from a window. Why, that one's Andre, the long-lost friend whom I last saw years ago. Odd to recognize him just from his posture. Even before I turned to check the legend, key to the party, number 8. A. Kimbrell, pianist. A student of Koch's wife, Dora, number 3, speaking to another pianist and a model, numbers 5 and 4. With no one to talk to, self-reliant Andre ensconces himself in his own niche, while out of sight behind him, the conversations open as old friends introduce their friends to recent strangers met in the elevator on their way up here, who, as the key tells us, are painters, critics, dealers, models, pianists, wives, and close friends. Nobody famous but our host and his friend, Raphael Sawyer. All now find themselves in a complex fiction, posed, disposed as couples, adjoining threesomes, linked to other couples by tightly rhyming postures and gestures. Groups are dissolved and then reconstituted as the eye responds to the overlapping figures arranged according to the subtle rule of perspective. Yet it's elegiac, this summer party, for though the mostly young are clearly taken with one another and their situation, none has yet noticed how very cool the colors of the room are in the fading light, and how the wind that's just stirred the lacy curtains has somehow also lengthened the shadows. All too soon, that moment of watches glanced at, looks exchanged, of thanking the host and hostess, as with a show of genuine reluctance, guests make their exit. I can picture Andre now turning back to find the party over, the room left vacant, ashtrays full, glasses empty. Another day of wine and poses. Facing outward, perhaps he had a glimpse of what lay ahead. Law school, books read and written, works and days of environmental, not a piano's, action. Two more poems. Some years ago, Billy Collins wrote a poem called Paradelle, and I read it, and it was a kind of parody of French fixed forms. It was a form that screwed down to a point where it was impossible really to make any sense at all out of it. And it was Billy's satire on that kind of stuff. And I thought, this is pretty funny, and I passed on to the next thing. And some months later, I received a letter from a woman who said, it's wonderful, we American poets have to thank Billy Collins for rediscovering this French form. And it would be a good thing if we all wrote paradelles, and I will put them into an anthology. And I took this and I put it into the folder that I have called The Death of Irony. And a month or so later, I got another letter from her saying, it turns out that this is not a received form, but Billy has invented this form. But I still think it's a good idea if we write these paradelles, and I'll keep on with the anthology. So that letter went into the same place. And irony tends to give its gifts endlessly in little layers. And about a year later, I received some poems. I had poems from two friends, which were paradelles, that they had written in response to this whole thing. And it turned out they were pretty good poems, that the difficulty, the impossibility of the form seemed to have inspired people to rise up and do it. So, irony upon irony. And I began thinking about irony sometime after 9/11. One of our great cultural commentators said that the only good thing about it was that it will mean the end of the age of irony. I happen to think that irony is socially very useful. And as you may have gathered, if it were done away with, I would be in a pretty poor state. So I wrote this poem, For the End of the Age of Irony. Why, if it's gone now, is there this leftover ambiance seeping into and staining the fabric of our conversation like red wine spilled on the bone-white sofa? Though its infrequent sightings are treated as cases of mere mistaken identity, and though its age may now be ended, it seems that irony is not quite done for. One old employer pays it occasional visits on Sunday, riding a trolley car out to the suburbs where it lingers, though much diminished, as he informs us. Odd to contrast its formerly vigorous habits of growth, its flourishing presence in those lives to which it once seemed central, with its now marginal situation, off in the corner, fusty leaves withering. If only we'd remembered to water it every so often. Yes, if only with our crocodile tears, if only. Such insincere remorse may remind you of how you enjoyed the late Donald Justice's version of Baudelaire's evasive elegy made for the clumsy servant, wondering only whether the French version should be preferred for its insincerity over the translator's nostalgia for those emotions he never suffered. It may seem strange that an inability to speak of irony without irony argues more clearly for its value than any argument it's not part of, or that nostalgia is the more keenly felt out of proportion to the experience causing it, as a magnifying lens will make any poor micro macro. But you were always taken with artifice, drawn to it like a sow to a truffle bed, weren't you? Finding it a refuge from the unbearably lofty motive, as from the unendurable punditry of those whom mere self-interest animates. You saw it deftly undermining acres of wind-powered bloviators, and noticed how, when we get too serious in its defense, it vanishes utterly. Ironists surely would consider such an odd outcome as, well, ironic. Better to leave its fragile and fugitive self to recover, with our negligence offering all it really needs for any eventual restoration, which someone, someday, on one reality, many perspectives, will lightly illustrate merely by letting you know that the beautiful necktie you're wearing isn't. And I will leave you with a dose of poison. This is a poem that set out to be a kind of history of poisons and reached a very dark place indeed, where I stopped for a while. And then it occurred to me that although I'm, pessimistic by nature, I don't live my life that way. So I felt I needed a more optimistic conclusion. There will be some terms you don't notice, you may not know because they're poisons. So. A few drops in a hollow ring, or even less on a hat pin, gave peace to emperor or king when the guard had fled and torchlit foes were gathering around his bed. This was the cure for life's disease. Observe how mindful Socrates drinks down the hemlock to the lees. Watch Charmian clasp her ardent mistress by the knees as she takes the asp. For others, an unsought egress, many an ogre and ogress whose motto was only aggress were shown the door, some regarding this as progress by hellebore. Nero, unhappy in his station, found poison won him swift promotion. See Claudius eschewing caution, greedily entreat a servant for yet another portion of the amanita. Secure inside his thick-set walls, the tyrant ages and appalls. Does no one hear his panic calls throughout the palace? Another king whose kingdom falls to Digitalis. The rise of the middle class occurred when all those kings had disappeared, and tight-lipped spouses, vexed or bored, learned of the kick that oatmeal has on being stirred with arsenic. And still to be found till recently in the clandestine armory of CIA and KGB was cyanide, used to dispatch an enemy or for suicide. No agent's training was complete before he'd learned how to secrete upon himself the bittersweet end of his mission, the little pill that swallowed neat ensured discretion. How innocent such poisons now appear to us, for even though fatal, they were, no matter how grimly horrific, local anesthetics, thoroughly site-specific. A dose intended for the master might have dispatched his dog or taster, but our poisons yield disaster without distinction, and on a scale so much vaster that our extinction appears to be quite plausible. A momentary lapse, a spill, and the stain spreads insensible to our lot. Or just consider, if you will, the microdot of some designer pathogen, dripped from the tip of a counterfeit pen or someone's nose. Less if than when you think about it. An end that, unlike hell or heaven, cannot be doubted, and which replaces God and devil, those outworn fictions, with a novel point of departure and arrival for humankind, one with no need for the survival of projective mind to speculate on what space is or what we are. Us it erases without disturbing Gaia's stasis or all we have wrought, the slowly evanescing traces of one dark thought. I have no wisdom to dispel the unbroken gloom I foretell, nor any wish to toll the knell of parting day. I pinched that last bit, could you tell, from Thomas Gray? Nor would I wish the world to be left to the darkness or to me. But how successful, then, could we possibly be at the task of reversing entropy by decree or fiat? Might there not be some good reason to cut short the losing season? And if not with a dose of poison, find life's antidote in blade, revolver, or the noose encircling one's throat? Though we may not know where to send the thank you notes that we have penned to the imaginary friend, much needs our praise, and many need the help we tend to get through their days. So if there is no God to thank, and if the cosmic data bank will soon, like the stock market, tank, if things get dire, uncork one corking Sauvignon Blanc, build up the fire. Inquire not nor seek to know, as Horace told us long ago, what hour of what day you'll go. Just carpe diem. Catch and release the ceaseless flow of AM and PM. For, as John Maynard Keynes once said, in the long run, we are all dead. Until that happens, eat your bread and drink your wine and lie with your love close in bed as I with mine.